Our happiest moments in life are to do with people, but our unhappiest moments in life are also to do with people. And so an explanation of human nature will help us to have much more of the happier moments. Now, my focus is on workplaces, but you'll also make the connection to your personal lives, and you'll also be able to, with this information, help friends and family who may need to have more of the happier moments at work. Now, there's a very good reason why workplaces can tend to be particularly challenging for us humans. And it is that for us humans, it's a very unnatural habitat. It was only starting in the Western world with the Industrial Revolution only about 200 or so years ago that we moved from being hunter-gatherers and villagers and moved into offices and factories. And of course, 250 years is no time to alter what it means to be human. The behaviour that served us well on the savannah, the behaviour which explains our social natures, the way our brains work, is still alive and well in today's offices, corridors and meeting rooms. So let's explore what it means to be human. And the one thing I want to cover today is what it means to be human in terms of the way in which we form relationships, a really critical part of being a social species. So where we need to start this journey is to explore when a baby human comes into the world, it comes with a range of behaviour. So when my great-nephew Hugo is born a member of our species, there's a range of behaviour that he doesn't have to learn. The definition of instinct, courtesy of Robert Winston of BBC fame, is a behaviour we don't have to learn. Now, obviously, Hugo is a member of a learning species. He's got a lifetime of learning ahead of him. He's also got, he'll have the power of brain plasticity to make certain choices and to fine-tune and develop his brain continuously. Yet he's got what it means to be human, like a species of like a baby of any species is born, comes into the world. He, being a member of Homo sapiens, he'll grow in a normal course of things. He has a certain pattern to be able to develop into a normal operating adult member of his species. So it can't be a question of do we or do we not have a package. The only question is, what is that package? Now, to understand that package of what it means to be human is that we're a social species. At our core, and the great attribute that allowed us to survive so well in our ancestral setting, is that we're a social species. We weren't out there on the savannah or our other ancestral places, surviving because of our strength like an elephant or our speed like a gazelle or a cheetah. We were there with others, not just members of our family, but with our wider clan group, surviving in both gathering and sharing food. If our family missed out on one particular occasion, there was another family who would share and reciprocate, and also to protect against predators. We protected against predators because of the size of our clan groups. Now, in the study of social species, there's two key ways in which social species spend their days. Two key things. The first one doesn't necessarily apply to us today, but the second one absolutely does if we're to have functional, happy relationships. The first is the social species like ancestral humans, chimpanzees and the other primates. The number one thing they do in their day is to forage for food. The second thing is to bond. So critical of this, so predictable is it, that the time we spend in our day bonding relates to both the size of our brain and consequently the size of our social group. Chimpanzees are quite brainy, the second brainiest species after us. With the size of their brain, they would live in, which is what happens in communities, up to around about 50 individuals. And to be able to serve the social bonding, to invest in social interactions, they spend about 15% of the day grooming and bonding. Humans, and this applied in our ancestral setting with our very big brain, that allowed us to live in much larger groups, which was a great protection, even better protection against predators. and allowed us to live in groups of up to about 150. And that 150 or so, which would be the size group to which we can feel a sense of identity and for which we are well known within our clan group, a group to which we become known, relates to the size of our brain. And it also drives, in our ancestral setting, the number of hours or the percentage of our day that we needed to spend servicing and grooming these social relationships. And that without healthy, positive social relationships, then certainly we're not happy and really we're not being human. And what's interesting about the science of this is that one way to solve this, in fact, it might not, 30 to 40% sounds a lot, and in fact, in our ancestral setting, it might not have been such a challenge. It sounds like a big part of our day, but even in the Kalahari, not the most abundant environment in which to live, hunter-gatherers might spend 3 to 6 hours a day foraging, maybe 1 day out of 3 hunting. So there's plenty of time for social grooming. And not only that, but one of the benefits of fire, for instance, is that we were able to extend our day. And it won't surprise us from this morning to know that music and the sharing of music and dance is a key way in which we could leverage our grooming relationships, because it was by singing and sharing music, we weren't just grooming one-on-one, we were grooming as a clan or a band. Now then, how do social species groom? The chimps, they groom physically. They'll sit around a large proportion of their day grooming, and they do so physically. Now, people who work with chimps can monitor friendships based on grooming patterns. At Taronga Zoo, in amongst the group of chimps that live in Taronga Zoo, there's 2 females, Sasha and Sheba. The keepers rarely saw these 2 females grooming. They weren't friends, and that's okay. Except they both had a baby at roughly the same time, and then they were forever seen grooming while the kids played. Now, for us humans, we groom through our greater vocal capability in the form of chit-chat, otherwise known as gossip. So we spend a large part of our day grooming. What proportion of mobile phone calls do you think, if a team goes out for lunch or coffee, what proportion of mobile phone calls or lunch conversations are grooming? And the answer is, courtesy of Robin Dunbar from Oxford, at least 66% of conversations when a team goes out for lunch is grooming. It is very pro-social, it is very social behaviour. And there's a good reason why mobile phones, I don't think the Maasai in this photo are checking cattle prices. They're probably checking what's going on with their friends or buddies or in the village next door. Because we groom by way of chit-chat. Jane Goodall, I've had the great pleasure and the benefit and the great joy of spending time with primatologist Jane Goodall, and she's well known to this conference on previous occasions has spoken, as you would know, as a young person. In 1960, she went off into the forests of Africa to study chimpanzees, and on one occasion, Dr. Goodall told me she's now 80 years of age. She was 77 when she made this point to me. She's not a big person, but she's very emphatic in making this point. She says, Andrew, 2 chimps cannot possibly be bonded if they spend no time grooming. Just from her observation in the forest, it is just not possible for 2 chimps to be bonded if they spend no time grooming. And I say to people in workplaces that you cannot possibly be bonded with your colleagues. If you're a manager in the room, connecting with your staff members with colleagues, people across the organisation connecting with colleagues across the organisation, you cannot possibly be bonded with your colleagues unless you spend time grooming. If all your conversations, if overwhelmingly your conversations are about job goals and key performance indicators and project updates and sales pipelines, as important as those workplace conversations are, they do not constitute grooming. And if they are the bulk of your conversations, your relationships will suffer. With colleagues at work, with teams at work, we must spend time bonding, and we bond by way of grooming, and we groom by way of conversations that really involve chit-chat. Conversations about what makes you the person that you are, your interests, your hobbies, what happened last weekend, what are the plans are this weekend, your family, your interests. And sure, conversations about what's going on around the organisation. Conversations other than tasks. And it's very pro-social behaviour. Now, in terms of, so what are some ways in which we can incorporate, test that we're doing enough grooming, or if not, adding to our suite of behaviours in using gossip positively? And I want to share with you three. Bonding by way of individual connections and with teams, collaborating and sharing information. Most of us find in workplaces that people across in other teams or departments don't cooperate enough. And thirdly, to understand team dynamics within groups. Bonding between individuals. Every team should have a ritual as to what you do as a team in order to bond. What is it that your team does? And it's probably going to be at least monthly or so. And just to share one example, there was one team in Melbourne who spotted this article on a website which is rating Melbourne's 10 best burgers. So this team kicked off that first month what they call the Burger Club. So what happens once a month? Somebody on the team decides which burger they're now going to test. The manager places the order and goes and picks up the order and brings the order back to a meeting room. Now, once they did try a restaurant which was nearby, and they all went out and had the burger in the restaurant, but the dynamic was just didn't quite work, so they resorted to their normal pattern, which seemed to work. And so they bring the burger back, and they'll just sit around as a team, eat, score and rate, assess the burger. And so they'll assess this month's burger, the Wagyu beef burger versus what did you think about last month's Black Angus, and today's jerky sauce versus last month's tomato relish. And they'll just sit around and bond. And it's what do we do as a team in order to bond? Every team needs a ritual. One that in a team I was with, Optus at the time, and the monthly meeting the night after our monthly meeting, we would go to a local Indian restaurant. We'd wander up the crickety wooden stairs in Crow's Nest above the Pacific Highway. No one ever saw a menu. The team's been going there for years. I was a fairly recent new member to this team. No one ever saw a menu. This wonderful aromatic food would appear, and we'd just sit around and bond. The second thing we can incorporate to make sense of gossip and grooming is to overcome the common complaint in organisations that people don't share enough or cooperate enough. And there's been some really insightful research of two harbours or two villages in the lobster fishing area of Maine in the US. And this research has studied two different groups and found an explanation on why one group, the Middle Harbour, rarely shared productive, useful information about lobster sites, whereas the second group, the Southern Harbour, had a very large proportion, or a significant amount anyway, of conversations on two-way radios and the like, which shared with people productive information about lobster sites. And these were the studies that the Middle Harbour, which I've briefly called a harbour made up of predominantly strangers, a lot of conversations, but very few of them contained information relating to lobsters. And of that 600 or so conversations, a very small, only about 2%, gave positive information to others about where lobsters could be found. But in another community, Southern Harbour, which I've briefly called made up of, they were a close community, and it turned out that it wasn't related to kin and it wasn't related to reciprocity, that is an expectation of information being returned, because a lot of information was shared with non-kin and it was shared with novices who would not be really expected to reciprocate. And a very large proportion, or significant I should say, not the majority, but a large number of those conversations involved the sharing of information about lobster sites, and quite a meaningful amount involved information positively identifying lobster sites to help others. And the point of this study I take from it is that if we want to have harmonious relationships across with colleagues in other teams and departments in our workplaces, then we need to first form a relationship. It doesn't happen without the relationship. And unless you know, on a grooming basis and a bonding basis, who those people are, what makes them who they are, certainly their name, their background and their interests, and that you spend time with them grooming, not by way of technical conversations, but going to see them and spending time in informal settings grooming, then you don't yet have a relationship, and cooperation across departments will suffer. And the third way is to understand, the third way to productively think about gossip is to think about the grooming patterns in the team that you might be part of. In this hypothetical but fairly close to a real team is Ali and all Ali's direct reports. And this is a sociogram, if you like, but not a very complex one. It's grooming patterns, the extent to which two people will go for coffee, and in going for coffee don't have to hold back. You've probably had the experience I've had in workplaces, is that there's a lot of people who you can absolutely go for coffee and you don't have to hold back. In other words, you can be open and share. You don't have to have any qualification to your conversations. And you know that what you share or talk about will not be inappropriately shared with others. There's also others you might have worked with from time to time. We know from this morning that they're really gifts to us, I think. People I've perhaps worked with from time to time where I've found out that I wasn't able to share really openly because that information might be inappropriately shared or misrepresented in others. So here we have Ali's team, and really the point is in observing the thick lines of those who don't have to hold back. Thin lines are somewhat connected, and in absence of line, it's not necessarily a task relationship, this is a grooming relationship. So for instance, Cindy and Bob, who are not connected, they might work closely on task, but they don't have a bonded gossip relationship. And so we're able to make sense, and in this case, Ali would ensure not only there seems to be a clique around Ali and David, and that could be because the single reason for cliques in departments or teams is that Ali, the manager, is showing favouritism, and we quickly intuit those who are in the group or outside the group. And so through this knowledge of human instincts, we can predict the basis on which people will form relationships. And like the other social species, us with our long history of being a really social species living in large groups, we can only bond, and please incorporate, and to get leverage out of this point, share with others, friends and family. We can only be bonded with colleagues and at work if we spend time grooming. Thank you.
By the time we're 60, more than 90% of us will have known someone close to us who has suffered from some sort of a neurological disorder.
You all know you're not going to live forever. There's only one way into this life and one way out.
I cannot prove to you anymore that anything is possible.
Talk about the marvelous thing that we now understand about our brains.
It gets so much better.